So every Sunday there would be a band practice in the living room. So when I was little, I would just sit there and watch and think about, what it must be like to be a part of that. And as I got older, I started to write songs. I took piano lessons when I was little, and as everyone in our family did. So it was 8 kids in our family, and had 3 older brothers who all played music, and 2 of whom actually formed a group and had a record deal. They were on the Beverly Hillbillies when I was a kid, and they did a guest spot, and they did a couple of other TV shows, and they were interviewed by what's his name on American Bandstand, and so as I was growing, Dick Clark, and so as I was growing up, I had this influence, and of course the Beatles were a major influence for everyone.
Yeah.
So I started writing songs when I was in junior high school, and I met somebody that we were really compatible with, and we started writing songs together, and we wanted to put a band together, and we needed a bass player. And my brother Davey was playing drums. He wanted to play drums, but we had a drummer who owned the PA system. And so we encouraged Davey to learn how to play the bass. So within a couple of weeks, he was already playing Jamie Jamerson licks off of Motown records. And so he became our bassist. And we started playing, high school dances and proms and just, local gigs and stuff. Meanwhile, my older brother's group was, they had signed a record deal. They had actually done a couple of record deals, and they signed a record deal with Richard Perry, who was a big producer in the 70s. And so we had this kind of connection already going. So their group broke up. They were called Bones at the time. Before that, they were called the Peppermint Trolley Company. And their group broke up, and then we decided to join forces. They wanted to join our group that Davey and I had, just our high school group that we had been playing around. So they started coming over we had built a rehearsal studio in the basement of our parents' house. And they started coming over to rehearse with us, and we started writing songs together, and we would make these demos in the basement, like little, just using a cassette recorder. And we started driving. This was in Redlands, which is about 65 miles east of Los Angeles. And so we started driving into LA. They had this connection with Richard Perry. So we would come into LA, and we would sit in Richard Perry's office and wait for him to walk through the door. And he would eventually walk through the door, and then we have this cassette in our hand, and we say, "Richard, we got new songs we want to play for you." And he'd grab the cassette, and he'd disappear back into his office, and we just hang around, and then he would kind of poke his head out into the lobby and go, "Okay, guys, come on in, I'll talk to you." And we did this for months and months, till eventually we signed a production deal with him, and he got us a deal on ABC Records. So it was through Richard Perry, but signed to ABC Records. And so he, it paid off actually hanging out in his lobby and trying to get something going. He was the executive producer, and Vinnie Poncia, who was at the time working on Melissa Manchester record, he had written a hit for Ringo, Back Off Boogaloo, and he had produced the last Bones record that my older brothers had done. So we recruited him to do more demos, and he was designated as our producer. While Richard Perry was producing Barry Nilsson, Carly Simon, Ringo Starr, and eventually the Pointers. So that's kind of the background of how we got our initial record deal as the Faragher Brothers.
So what was the story then between how the first 2 albums were on ABC and then you guys switched to Polydor? Because I know the Polydor albums are more like definitely rockier albums.
Yeah. Well, our first album was really an accumulation of material that had been written prior to us joining together and in the infancy of us all joining together as a family group. So there were many years of writing represented on that first album. So the first album was really made up of a lot of demos. Some, I would say about half the album was demos that we had recorded prior to actually going into the studio, and we had doctored the demos. Some of them were like just 8-track demos, and then we went in and we redid them, we doctored them, and so it was my first recording experience, and Davey's first bass player. That was his first recording experience as well. So when we did the first album, it had a very much of an R&B vibe
Right.
to it, and the record company, even though they embraced what we were doing, they didn't know how to market us. And
Yeah.
Norman Seeff had done the photo shoot, and we had this picture on the cover. We looked like a rock and roll band, we looked like Black Oak, Arkansas or something.
Yeah.
Yet played the music, it sounded more like kind of a Philly thing, like the Spinners or something. It had more of a blue-eyed soul to it. So after we did the first album, there was a lot of resistance because they would send the album to rock stations and they go, "Oh, this is too soft for us, this is too R&B," and they would send it to R&B black radio, and they would resist it because they look at the cover and go, "We're not going to play these guys,"
Yeah.
So we had a lot of resistance, and so on the second album, there was a decision made by the record company that we wouldn't put a picture on the album. So in addition, we had, after the first album was done, we went out on the road. We went on the East Coast, and we played a bunch of gigs. We played with Tower of Power. Actually, we played with Toots and the Maytals, who Toots just passed away recently.
Yeah.
Boston at Paul's Mall. We played the Cellar Door in Washington. We played the Bitter End in New York. So we were playing all around the East Coast. And so we became pretty polished, and we had a lot of new material. When we went into the studio for the second album, we decided to try a different producer. So we had Kenny Kerner and Richie Wise, who had produced Stories that they had a big hit with Louie, 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 Louie. And then they also produced some Gladys Knight stuff. So we thought, well, it was a good fit, and we decided to go into the studio with them. And so we hired some musicians to help us with that. We had Jay Graydon on guitar, came and played on the album. Mike Baird played drums. We had like all the session guys come in, as well as us playing along on the recording. So the complexion of that album took on a whole different vibe because it wasn't as raw and kind of organic as the original, because we were trying to go for something that was a little more crossover, and because we didn't put the picture on. I mean, I regret not having put a picture on that album because it just, it just seemed kind of like nameless, faceless, I should say.
Yeah.
And then MCA bought ABC Records. So MCA, Universal, absorbed ABC. And so we had lost our record deal just through that absorption of ABC Records. So they dissolved ABC Records. Meanwhile, we were changing management. During our first album, we had Bob Silverstein, who was married to Diana Ross, was our manager. And when we went out on the road, that tour on the East Coast, he and Diana split up, and he went into he actually drove to Palm Springs, closed himself up in a motel room, and was just doing cocaine, and nobody could get a hold of him on the phone.
Oh, wow.
To get us into hotels, to get our PO numbers, to do any of the things that we needed to do. So that it caused a lot of anxiety for us as a group, and And so we kind of lost that first album, which was really poised to do well, I thought, because the record company wasn't prepared to market us in any particular way, and then we had this manager who freaked out and wasn't really paying attention, wasn't keeping his eye on the ball. So when we came back, then we did that second album, and then ABC got absorbed by MCA, so that deal dissolved. And so we went back, was kind of back to the drawing board. We had made some really good connections at ABC Studios on Beverly in Los Angeles. And so we got free time to go in and do some demos in ABC Studios. And we recorded a demo of Stay the Night and a couple of other songs that we had written. And we had a new manager, and he shopped us, and we got a deal on Polydor. So with the new manager, kind of a new direction, we kind of went back more to some of our softer doo-wop roots on that album. And we were listening to a lot of Curtis Mayfield and a lot of early Philly records and stuff. So that had a little bit more of a commercial vibe to it. Plus, we brought Vinny back, Vinny Poncia, to produce it. And Vinny had just had a huge smash writing You Make Me Feel Like Dancing for Leo Sayer. So we felt like we had a little momentum at that point. After we did that album, we did some appearances. We did American Bandstand. We had done Don Cornelius Soul Train after we'd released our first album. Which we've tried to get copies of, and it's like it doesn't even exist anymore. They must have taped over it or something. But we did Soul Train with Rufus, and because Bob Silverstein actually managed Rufus with Shaka Khan at the time, and we had done some shows with Rufus at the Roxy in Los Angeles. So had made that kind of connection, which became important for me later on.
So is there any kind of story related to the final album you guys did on Polydor? Because that's probably my favorite.
Well, at that point, by the time we did the last album, for the Faragher Brothers' last album, we had incorporated our sister Pammy to sing, and our brother Marty to play drums as well. So it was right at the point when new wave stuff was really happening in Los Angeles, and we had been performing at the Starwood and a couple of clubs in the Valley, and we had like regular gigs that we were doing, and it became a little edgier with guitars, and we were kind of swept up in what was going on in the city at the time. So it ended up with a little bit more of a rocky edge, more of a pared down production value, and Vinny produced that album as well. So Vinny Poncia produced 3 of our albums out of the 4 that we did.
Yeah, because I noticed on the final album, you're singing most of the songs, aren't you?
I'm singing a lot of the songs. Let me just close. It's like weird. Yeah, I'm singing a lot of the material. We had 3 lead singers in the group, and when Pammy joined, we ended up having 4 lead singers. So it was always a thing about who was going to sing and how did we divide the songs up. At that point, after at the 4th album, there was a lot of kind of discouraging aspects. Like a lot of the things that we had hoped for didn't come through. We felt like we'd been burned by a lot of different producers and people that we've been dealing with, and so Davey and I had become more aggressive in terms of writing and just being more involved in the production and the direction. And Davey and I, after the 4th album, we kind of made the decision that we weren't going to do it anymore, and that we were going to go off on our own and do our own thing, So Davey had a lot of live gigs that he was doing, and I was really pursuing the writing aspect and was really interested in getting a publishing deal and trying to move in that direction. And as an artist as well, writing my own songs.
Okay. Before I move on, I wanted to ask if you have favorite songs from the final album, because I love Mystic Eyes and Had to Leave.
Oh, cool. Mystic Eyes, that was written, that our mom actually had something to do with that. She helped put that lyric together. Yeah, because our mom was very influential in musically in our lives. So that was kind of that kind of had a little bit of a dedication to her in that she was part of the writing process for that.
Okay.
I'm glad you picked that song. It's one of my favorite too.
Yeah, I definitely think that could have been a hit song. I mean, that Mystic Eyes and Had to Leave, they both kind of have, Mystic Eyes especially has like a foreigner vibe to it in the chorus.
Yeah.
Were you, as a singer, was there anybody you were trying to emulate?
Well, I always got kind of the ad-libby rougher parts, and so Levi Stubbs was my all-time favorite from the Four Tops.
Oh, okay.
And I love Bobby Womack and Curtis Mayfield and Al Green, and just like the R&B singers, and of course John Lennon and the Beatles, were big influence too. But anything that's soulful, anything that had any kind of a feeling to it, that it didn't matter if it was black or white or whatever. It just, as long as the singers were truthful and soulful and making you feel something, it's just about communicating an emotion, communicating a lyric, and just getting some kind of vibe out of it,
Right.
So, I mean, I'm really a student of radio from the 60s. That was the whole thing growing up, was, listening to the radio, and then AM radio really was very satisfying because it played everything, so if you listen to Top 40 radio in 1968 or 1969, I mean, you were hearing everything from Tom Jones to the Beatles to the rockiest of rock to the softest of R&B, and I mean, basically everything was on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember being in the station wagon with the whole family and jumping over the front seat to leaning over the front seat to push the button on the radio before somebody else did to get the right station to hear what we wanted to hear. That was like like leaping across the front seat to switch the radio station. So that really was the main influence. So that that crossed a lot of boundaries. That because it was so eclectic at the time. And the same thing when FM radio came in the late 60s and the early 70s and became more album oriented.
Right.
Then that became the influence. The listening to full albums, full on. But in terms of influence for me, it was just like whatever was on the radio that I loved. Anything that hit me. It wasn't like I was ever genre specific and only listening to a certain thing. But I think I was just a victim of the music culture that was being presented to me, through radio. It's unfortunate that we don't have that for young people today.
I know.
I mean, that was had a massive effect on us culturally, but it was an influence that was never erased for me, and I still, I'll have like I'll go back and I'll find old records that were, I have a huge vinyl collection and still listen. I have turntable and still listen to records, and it's a big deal for me. I still love it.
So, since considering how many places you guys played on the Strip, at that time, you probably have some cool stories about, I don't know, like meeting or playing with big people in the industry at the time, or, you know, like when new wave music was breaking out. And
Yeah, and I mean, in LA, you know, all of those groups that went on later to do well were, you know, mainstays at the, you know, at the clubs. So you would see them at the Troubadour when we play the Troubadour, the
yeah.
Starwood, the Whiskey, you know. So after the Faragher brothers broke up, then Davey and I formed a group with Caleb Quay and Roger Pope, who were alumnus from Elton John's band.
Oh,
And
okay.
they had also played with Hall & Oates. They had gone
Mhm.
on the road with Hall & Oates. So they were back in LA and they were looking for something to do, and they had written some songs, and then we started writing with Caleb and Roger, and we had a group called the Troops. And after the Faragher brothers broke up, which would have been about 1979, then in 1980, Davey and I were part of this group, and we played all over LA. Once again, at the Whiskey, the Starwood, the Troubadour, all the venues. Madame Wong's was a big one.
Mhm.
Madame Wong's East, Madame Wong's West. So we played a lot in LA.
Yeah.
We weren't on the road at that point. We pretty much everything we did but LA had a really great music scene, a lot of great music going on, you know. At
And
the same time, Davey was writing with some writers who had been signed to MCA Music, and I started playing on a lot of demos because I really got into keyboard playing, and as well as singing my own stuff. But you know, I was pretty well versed in synthesizers, with a Prophet and a Mini Moog and a Juno and all that, you know, and I
right.
got a drum machine and all that, you know. So I was getting a lot of work going into the studio as a keyboard player and a kind of a arranger.
That's the first thing I was going to ask in terms of your session period was when you played on Peter Criss's solo album.
Yeah, Vinny produced, the guy who produced our Faragher Brother
Yeah.
records. He ended up producing a couple of Kiss albums,
Mhm.
and he produced the Peter Criss solo album of the 4 solo albums that they had done, and then
Yeah.
he also produced a Peter Criss album later, and Peter had picked up, but Vinny had presented one of the demos that I had recorded for myself that I had written with Davey and his partner at the time, Bree Howard, and then Peter Criss had heard the song and wanted to put it on his album.
Okay.
So yeah. Meanwhile, we were doing through the connection that we had established with Rufus, because we had been signed, we'd shared the same manager, and we had done some shows with them.
Mhm.
I had gone around shopping for a publishing deal, and I'd written all these songs once again on a cassette recorder. Everything was recorded on it. I would go back and forth from one cassette to the other, adding parts,
Mhm.
adding keyboard parts and vocals and things like that. Actually, no vocals, just keyboard parts, and had been shopping for a publishing deal, and basically I would take my cassette, hand it to whoever the A&R person was at the publishing company, and they'd pop the cassette into their recorder, and then it'd start to play it, and then I would sing the song live over their desk,
Oh.
you know, because I didn't have vocals on any of the demos, and
Mhm.
I did maybe 5 different meetings, Warner Chappell, you know, April Blackwood, and I had done all these different publishing meetings, and I went to 20th Century Fox Music, which was headed by Herb Eisman at the time, and Andre Fisher, who was the drummer in Rufus, had just been hired as a staff producer for 20th, and he heard that I was in the office, and he asked me to come in, and was like, "Oh, Andre, great, great to see you here, blah blah blah." And he suggested that they sign me to 20th Century. So then I signed to 20th Century, and Andre at the time had just started producing Dusty Springfield,
Yep,
and
that's what I was gonna.
yeah, he wanted me. I had a couple of demos that he really liked, and he wanted to produce demos for me for my own solo thing. But then some of the songs that I had, he wanted to introduce me to Dusty and see if she liked any of the material. And I met with Dusty, drove to her hotel room on the Strip, and went in there and sat with her and played her some songs. And there was a little piano, and I sat and played her songs, and we just hit it off so well. It was like love at first sight. She wanted to do two of my songs.
Yeah.
We ended up becoming really good friends and hanging out together, even when we weren't working. We spent a lot of time together, and I ended up working on literally every song on her album for that White Heat album.
Yep.
Even just playing, she wanted me on everything, singing a background part on this, playing a tambourine on this one, playing a synthesizer on this, playing a piano on this. It was just like she just wanted me around, and we just hit it off so well. And I really miss her. She was really a great person. Loved working with her. Learned a lot from working with her in the studio.
Yeah, when I found that album of hers, that was a really pleasant surprise, because I wouldn't expect her to have gone down the whole, Pat Benatar route. She's not someone that you would really expect to do that, and then it's actually a really good album.
Yeah, it's a really good album. It didn't, she was a difficult person, to say the least. She just had, not everybody got along with her well. And so the fact that I got along with her really well was nice for me, and nice in the studio. But she was somebody who would, she'd go in to do her vocal, and she'd turn the lights down so you couldn't see her because she was very shy.
Oh.
And then she would just have a light on the lyrics, and you would just see just a little bit of her face through the window, and she would just go bit by bit by bit through her vocal, correcting what she didn't like. And it might not have been something that you would have even noticed, but she would have noticed. And it wasn't just based on pitch or, pitch correctness. It was based on feeling. So something could have been sung perfectly in pitch, but if it wasn't communicating the exact feeling that she wanted it to communicate, she would do it over and over and over till she got it. And she really understood the process, and she wasn't afraid to break it down. Like she was really hard on herself, and unfortunately, being that hard on herself really created a lot of other issues for her that there were several nights, 2 or 3 nights that I remember, where she called me up in the middle of the night, and I had to come to her apartment, and she was, she had kind of superficially cut herself, like,
oh my God.
And, and there were moments where we had to call a hospital and, get help for her. And she, and it was really hard for her. She had a hard time. She was bisexual, so she was dealing with how to fit in to into the music world, But she got a lot of joy from working in the studio, and every night was an adventure for her. She would come into the studio and get on the phone and order food for everybody, or order a case of wine, or like, she was very extravagant and kind of flamboyant, but what wonderful soul, musical soul.
Yeah, I actually knew that like one or two of the songs on that album that she was singing about her relationship at that time with Carol Pope, who was,
Yeah.
yeah. I
Well,
knew that.
Carol was, when I went, my first introduction to her, when I went and met her in the hotel room, Carol was there. Carol
Okay.
Pope was there too. Yeah. And then, you know, they were deep in a relationship at that time.
Hmm.
And Dusty wanted she wanted more edge, and the drum machine, the fact that things were changing. I mean, Prince really had a lot to do with kind of changing
Right.
the drum machine in R&B and pop music, you know, adding that as a legitimate sound, and that it became just a little more synth based and more technical. And because I was a keyboard player and I had ventured into the world of synthesizers and drum machines, I became a more valuable asset in the recording studio at that time. So
Yeah.
so that was that was kind of the beginning of, for me, doing a lot of outside stuff, because before it had always been my own recording or working with the Faragher brothers, and in that
Right.
context.
So right before you had the songs for Staying Alive, were you ever offered a solo deal?
No, actually, I'd done a bunch of demos prior to working with Andre, and then I started working with Andre as my producer to try to get me a record deal. And none of the material that we did had been picked up, and I started writing. I was put together with this producer, Spencer Proffer, who had Pasha Records and Pasha Music.
Mm-hmm.
He ended up having a lot of success with Quiet Riot.
Yeah.
Come Feel the Noise. And Pasha Studios was down on Melrose, just a block away from what is it? Not Universal, Paramount Studios on Melrose. And so Herb Eisman, who was the head of 20th Century Music, 20th Century Music had been bought by this multi-millionaire. I can't recall his name, but when he bought the record company and the music and the publishing company, then Herb Eisman, who had been the president of 20th Century, was given the opportunity to take some of the songwriters that he had signed to 20th.
Okay.
So there were, he only kept 3. So he kept me, he kept Bruce Hornsby, and he kept, who's this? The songwriter that wrote A Pretty Young Thing on the Michael Jackson Thriller.
Oh, okay.
And so he scored really well, because obviously Bruce Hornsby did, and a lot of those demos that he had done for 20th became that album, the breakout album for Bruce Hornsby.
Mm-hmm.
And almost immediately after doing that, he put me together with this guy, Spencer Proffer, who had a songwriter that he had signed as a staff writer named Randy Bishop. And so they put Randy and I together, and we started writing songs for my solo thing. And we had written this song, We Dance So Close to the Fire, and it was one of my demos. And when Staying Alive, when they came up with the concept for Staying Alive, the idea was that they had Sylvester Stallone come in. Sylvester Stallone had been very successful with Survivor on the Rocky soundtrack. So basically, they wanted him to kind of repeat that, which was kind of a rock-based thing. Mm-hmm. But the Bee Gees were committed to doing anything that had to do with the Staying Alive concept, and so they were committed to do at least half of the album. So basically, Sylvester Stallone hated the Bee Gees. He hated their voices. He complained about the fact that they sang up in falsetto. He says, "Oh, they sing up in this high voices." He related that to being some kind of a wimpy thing. Oh. because he was the Survivor guy, you know, he wanted the rock thing going, you know. So they had gone through all kinds of motions to try to find the right music for Staying Alive, and they had cut all these tracks, and they had cut a scene with John Travolta, the final scene, which was based on Dante's Inferno, where he's on the stage and he's dancing his big Broadway opening in a loincloth, and he's all pumped up, Sylvester Stallone style, you know. And they didn't like the song. They ended up not liking the song. The song that they had cut all of this, and it's the longest scene in the movie, and it's like 13 minutes long. And they hated the song. So they were looking for something that had to do with fire because it was Dante's Inferno. And I had written this song, We Danced So Close to the Fire. And I got a phone call from my publisher, Herb Eisman, and he said, can you go to Paramount Studios, go to editing room number so-and-so. They really love your song and they want to talk to you about it. So I go to Paramount Studios, I go into this editing room, and who opens the door but Sylvester Stallone. And he already has my song sped up on this, you know, this editing projector thing. Right. And he plays me the scene with John Travolta jumping around, dancing, leaping through the air to my song, but it's all sped up. It's really fast, you know, so it's like my voice sounds like Mickey Mouse or something. You know? We dance so close to the fire, you know, and I'm listening to this, you know, but of course I'm like, you know, I'm in seventh heaven because this means that we're going to get a song on this soundtrack. The first Saturday Night Fever soundtrack was at that point, this was before Michael Jackson's Thriller, was the biggest album of all time, you know. So we're all thinking, wow, we could sell 20 million albums. This is a great opportunity, you know. And so, yeah, Sylvester Stallone, you know, he took the bridge of the song, which was only 8 bars long on the demo, and he made it into, he just looped it over and over and over and over again and made it into like this 6-minute segment, and wanted me to recut the song at this tempo with me singing, and to add this really long, elongated bridge section that was halftime. It was because the song was, you know, it's like really fast, but then the middle section was like bum, 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 and that section was suddenly now longer than the rest of the song. It was like 6 minutes long. Yeah. So so that was the beginning of that project, and we recorded it at Pasha Studios, which was right down the street from Paramount. And so he would come in the studio. This happened like 2 or 3 times to oversee our recording of the song. And you know, when I did the vocal, he was there directing me, you know, pressing the talkback button, you know, I want you to sing up here, you know, hiya, and it was a crazy. He would come into the studio with this entourage of people, maybe, you know, 13 or 14 people piling out of his white limo. You know, he would travel with his lighting guy, his sound technician, his makeup person. All these people would come in the studio and he would oversee the recording of this song. And after I did the vocal, he came to me and he said, you know, I have another song that that my brother sang, and nobody likes his vocal on it. And I was wondering if you'd be interested in doing the vocal. I go, yeah, sure. He gave me a cassette. It was Look Out for Number One. And he said, can you do the vocal tomorrow? And I was like, okay, yeah, sure. And I learned the song that evening, went to the studio, I think it was Ocean Way Studio on Sunset, and Stuart Levine was the producer. I walked in and I did that in one take, basically, just one take. Wow. And, you know, I went out and did the vocal, and I was like, okay, what's next? And he was like, come on in, come in. I go, what do you mean? I just sang. He goes, that was the vocal. That was it. Come in. And I went in and we listened to it. And Stuart Levine starts rolling this big fat joint on the console, and he starts smoking. It was like, yeah, good job, great. And now I had two songs that I was singing on the album,
Yeah.
on the soundtrack.
So I saw on the YouTube video where you're singing "Look Out for Number One" on Solid Gold, it says that the players. I was curious if the players on the song were the same as shown in the video, because you have Pat Mastelotto, you have your brother, and then you have Dennis Herring. So is that all the same as like?
It was yeah, that would have Dennis would have played. Yeah, they were all the same.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was Pat Mastelotto played on all my demos at that time. And,
Okay.
And it would either be Dennis Herring on guitar or Michael Thompson on guitar.
Okay.
And my brother Davey playing the bass. Yeah, but that was accurate actually. Those were the guys that played on the actual recording.
Okay, that's cool.
Except for the guy who was pretending to play sax. I don't remember, but he was a friend of Dennis's, and
Oh, okay.
and he was pretending to play keyboard and sax on the Solid Gold.
And then a year after that, in '84, do you remember anything about singing background vocals for Danny Spanos?
Yeah, Danny was a Pasha artist, and he was a pretty wild guy. He would have big parties in the studio. He got in trouble for having sex on the console in the
Wow.
in the recording studio. It was pretty crazy. And I also did background vocals for it was Rick Derringer and Carmine Appice.
DNA.
DNA, yeah. And then we in the same studio at Pasha. I recently drove by that location. It's gone. The studio's gone. So many of these recording studios are gone now.
Yeah.
There was quite a scene there. Spencer Proffer was doing quite well, and had a lot of artists signed to his label.
Yeah, I was curious about Danny because I like his music, and then he like completely disappeared off the face of the earth, seemingly.
Yeah, I don't know what happened to him.
And then a year after that, in '85, you also played on an album I really like. It was a duo for RCA called Drama.
Yeah, I don't. Do you remember who was in the group?
Yeah, it was Suzanne Taylor and Pat Taylor. It was a husband and wife, and it was like a synth pop thing, a really good synth pop thing.
Yeah, that would have been the period where I started, because I basically after the Staying Alive thing, like they obviously were, when that record came out, they were leaning towards promoting Sylvester Stallone's brother, Frankie Stallone, in terms of who was going to get the attention. And then obviously the Bee Gees had singles that they were pulling off the record. And if the album, if the movie had been a lot better, maybe the album would have sold better, but we still sold like 5 million copies, and it was a top 5 album. And, Frankie Stallone's single did well. Look Out for Number One was scheduled to be a single, and Jelly Bean and Arthur Baker had done remixes in New York, and it was all set up. But when it came out, there was just absolutely no promotion at all. It was just, they.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
And it had been after 4 or 5 other singles that had already been released from the album. So it was already kind of dead in the water. Though I remember when the album came out, we had a review in the LA Times for the album, which basically they hated the album except for the 2 songs that I did, which they pointed out. And so it was like I got a good review, but the rest of the album got a bad review. Mm-hmm. So that didn't help, sell the album. It was nice for me, but not that many people cared at that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, I saw there's a lot of comparisons like in the comments of the YouTube video, and I agree too that vocally on those two songs that you sound like a mix between Springsteen and Michael Hutchence from INXS.
Oh, thank you. That's a compliment. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Is that something that you never really considered, like that you sounded like, or?
No, I mean, I was really a big Bruce Springsteen fan, so that would have been something that I could have very easily have been influenced by that, at the time. But once again, it was just it was more about just being soulful and kind of true to the music,
Right.
Just I didn't know how else to sing, basically that's just how I sing.
Yeah. And right after that, considering the reviews that those two songs got, was there still no potential offer for you to get a solo deal?
No, I at that point I was kind of like realizing that that the whole idea of getting a record deal. I mean, the premise of getting a record deal for so many artists, especially during that period of time, was just about getting a record deal. And now I had been in a position where I'd had 2 different record deals as the Faragher brothers, and then a record deal through the movie with RSO for the 2 songs that I had done for the movie.
Right.
The ultimate was to get the record deal for so many people. But once they got the record deal, it kind of then the work began in terms of doing the recording, and then the most important part of it, what's going to happen afterwards when the record's done. How's it going to get promoted? And just getting a record deal was like such a goal for so many people. I mean, everybody I knew was trying to get a record deal, but getting a record deal was kind of symbolic, but it didn't really necessarily mean that anything was going to happen.
Right.
Yeah, you were closer to achieving an opportunity to do something, but unless you had the right people behind you and you had the money behind you, getting a record deal really didn't mean that much. And so I became more interested in being a writer, because I had realized at that point that the writers were the ones who were making most of the money. And like if you owned your own publishing, or if you had a piece of your own publishing, as a writer, you had a greater chance of getting something to happen, even a record deal. So writing became the emphasis, basically. And and so I had been signed to 20th, and then that got transferred to Herb Eisman Music. And then when after the Staying Alive thing ended, I was once again kind of free in terms of writing. So I started considering getting another publishing deal, but instead of just going out and looking for a publishing deal, I was writing, but I had a situation where I had my keyboards set up in MCA Recordings basement studio, which Glenn Ballard had helped with, and my brother had helped put that together. And we became kind of like the house band, and whoever would come through the door, any of the MCA writers, I would play on their demos.
Yeah.
And they were song publishing demos. So it was like there were relationships with songwriters, so that became an entree for me to be introduced to songwriters who had just been signed to publishing company, and they would co-write with songwriters from other publishing companies as well. So, it was an opportunity to meet songwriters who were up and coming to play on their record or play on their demos, which so many of them became records. Like in the case of the Pointer Sisters, that's how I got to work on the Pointer Sisters albums, was the fact that the songwriters who were involved, Mark Goldenberg or Brock Walsh, Robbie Neville, or any of the songwriters that I was working with, they would get these cuts, and by getting those cuts, they would take because what we were recording were really high quality demos,
Right.
He's, MCA recording studio, publishing studio, was one of the first publishing studios to have anything more than like just a cheap old 4-track recorder. They actually had a 2-inch 16-track MCI machine and a nice MCI board, and the quality of the demos that we were recording were as good as the records that were being released. So when they would shop these demos, a lot of the producers or the A&R people or the groups themselves would say, hey, let's just use the demo, and they would redo the vocals over the top, and then we would add something, maybe a little more overdubs to the tracks. Right. But a lot of the demos that we did became records. And I also started producing Diane Warren's demos for her. Oh. Diane Warren, the songwriter. Mm. I had met her through April Blackwood Publishing, and she was signed, I think she was signed to April Blackwood. And one of the A&R people there, Linda Blum, had introduced me to Diane, and as a singer, wanted me to sing her demos for her. And so I started singing her demos, and then I ended up producing her demos. And, when I started working with her, we would literally go in, there was just a 4-track recorder, and I would sit on a bed with a microphone in my hand and sing a demo for her, literally in a bedroom. Wow. And then we started doing more complicated demos, and I started producing her demos for her. And after the Pointer Sisters had Automatic, the hit Automatic, which had Dennis Herring was playing guitar on that, did kind of a Latin jing, 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 jing kind of guitar part. Yeah. And she had this demo that she wanted to record, and she wanted that sound. It was kind of a Latin sound, Caribbean mambo kind of vibe to it. And so I pulled Dennis in, and we did the demo. It was The Rhythm of the Night. But instead of Dennis playing it on the guitar, it sounded too much like a cop of Automatic. I had like a marimba sound on the DX7, and I played it on the marimba. And then the next morning, we stayed up all night doing that demo. And then the next morning, I got a call from Linda Blum, and she says, we just got the song cut. It was like 9 o'clock in the morning. They had sent the demo over first thing in the morning to Richard Perry, and he wanted it for DeBarge. And literally, it wasn't even 8 hours after we had finished recording the demo that they got the cut. And that was really Diane Warren's first solo written hit, because she had some hits before, but none that she had written solely by herself. And then, so working as a keyboard player and as a arranger and a producer, I was in a position where I could meet a lot of songwriters, put me in a nice spot, and so I stopped kind of paying attention to being an artist and being more of a person behind the scenes.
Going back to, I was going to bring up Brock Walsh. I was wondering if you also played on his solo album that was only released in Japan, or if that was, I know your brother did. I was just curious.
I thought I had, but I don't think I'm listed. I don't think I did, because a lot of that album was strictly recorded at MCA Studios, publishing studios. Almost the entire album was recorded there. And I know that, Davey even went to Japan, I think, to when that album came out. Andrew Gold was on the tour. Davey went, but Brock, I worked with on a lot of the stuff that Brock did.
Yeah, I noticed.
The Melissa Manchester thing that he did. I think the one relationship that was really the dearest to me at the time was Robbie Neville.
Yeah.
Robbie and I just, loved each other. And we always, we stayed together in England, and when we worked on his album, we'd spent a lot of time together and became really close friends. still to this day, we, you know, are still close.
Did you ever meet with Billy Steinberg or Tom Kelly back then?
No, they were in their own world. It was like, you know, there were different publishing companies had different, you know, they had their own staff writers. At that point, in the mid '80s, it was really about MCA. You know, it was really about MCA music, to the point, to the degree where once I ended up producing a Vanity album for Motown. So I had done some demos for Motown. Alfie Silas was one of our singers that we would get to come in and do demos for us when we were doing demos in MCA. And then she signed to Motown. And I had met with Iris Gordy, and Iris wanted me to do co-writes with some of their writers and produce some of the demos. So at Hitsville in Los Angeles, I went in and demoed some tracks for her. And one of those songs, Alfie ended up doing for her album with Willie Hutch producing. But they wanted me to produce this one particular song. So I went in with Willie, mixed it, and I went in with Willie Hutch and finished it. But it was recorded as a demo at Hitsville in their like little demo studio that they had.
Yeah.
So I started doing some stuff for Motown, and then this guy that had actually recorded the Troops with that earlier group that I was talking about with Caleb Quay and Roger Pope.
Right.
Skip Drinkwater had, produced some of our demos for the Troops, and he called me up and said there was a project on Motown, Vanity, who, you know, was in Vanity 6 that Prince had produced.
Yeah.
Was doing a record for Motown, and he wanted to know if I wanted to produce it with him, and I was like, yeah. So I ended up going in the studio and working with Vanity, and through my MCA connections, wrote songs with Robbie and with other MCA writers to be recorded by Vanity. And I ended up with like 4 or 5 songs on the Vanity album that I had written, as well as producing the whole album. After I had those songs, one of them, Under the Influence, became a top 10 R&B hit.
Yeah.
And MCA then at that point offered me a publishing deal so I had been working on so many of their tracks. I knew everybody in there. I knew Leeds Levy, Carol Ware, all the Rick Shoemaker, all the people that were in that company. And so then it was just like a natural progression for me to sign and become one of their staff writers.
So then, yeah, in the later '80s, you wrote a song, Double Our Numbers, for Parthenon Huxley.
Yeah.
You played on that too, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I produced Parthenon's demos at that point. And but Parthenon had just, I believe he signed to MCA. We were recording his demos in MCA publishing studio. The publishing studio was really good, you know. And Glenn and Francis Buckley, who was the engineer, had really brought it up to a point where it was as good as any studio you could record at, you know.
Right.
So, you know, like my brother Davey, this is going back a little bit, had written a song with Glenn Ballard that was called Nightline, and that song was up for being on Michael Jackson's Thriller album. Michael had taken the demo that we had played. Quincy Jones had taken the demo, and they slaved it up to another multi-track machine with our rhythm track on the 16 track, and then they had a 24 track that they would sync it up to, and it was 24 track just filled with Michael Jackson vocals. And then another machine that had nothing but the Waters background vocals on, you know. So there was like 3 machines running but the initial tape that they were using for, as the basis of the whole thing was our demo that we had recorded in MCA's publishing studios. So, and that was the beginning of really Glenn's relationship with Quincy, which turned into Man in the Mirror and producing Michael Jackson on Bad and a lot of other projects. So that he had been the designated writer, even though there were 3 writers on Nightline. Mm-hmm. He was the person that walked into Quincy's office with the reel, and he was, so he had the connection, and he was able to utilize that connection, and it turned into something that, it was the gold mine for him, really.
Yeah. Did you get to meet Michael ever?
I'm sorry, I lost you. Say that again.
Oh, did you ever get to meet Michael?
No, I didn't get to meet him. Apparently, he was really great to work with, though.
Yeah.
Glenn said that, he was just as sweet as could be in the studio.
So then in '89, how did you meet E.G. Daily, or how did that all come about?
Yeah, well, when I was signed to MCA Music, then they put me together with Lottie Golden, and Lottie and I started writing. And we ended up moving to New York City, where she was originally from. We became partners. And we, as MCA writers, we were given projects, all the time to, can you work on this project? Can you work on that? We worked on the Jets, Lisa Fiorillo. The A.G. Daily came through Aaron Jacobus, who was the A&R guy for A&M Records. And he came to New York. E.G. lived in L.A., and he had this project. And this was at the time where, living in New York, I decided that I wanted to put a recording studio together. And when Aaron suggested that we produce the E.G. Daily album, then I thought, well, this is a great opportunity to go ahead and buy the gear, and through working on the album, we'll make enough money to pay back the cost of putting a studio together. And so I bought like a 24-track machine and a Trident console and set it up in the apartment in the living room. So basically the living room was just a recording studio. It was a 1-bedroom apartment. And E.G. flew to New York, and she stayed at the Mayflower Hotel, and she'd come back and forth, and she would do I set up the bedroom with a microphone, and she would do the vocals in the bedroom, and I'd be in the living room with the board and the machine and recording her vocals in there. And that kind of started a whole new era for me of doing home recording and having a setup. From that point, I've always had, from like 1988 on, I had a recording studio in wherever I live, basically, to do recording.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because most of the songs on that album are co-writes between you and her, I noticed.
Yeah, and I really like that album. I think it came out great. I remember after that album was released, Glenn Ballard called me up and said, "God, I love this album.
Yeah,
I love what you did with this." And shortly after that, some of those aspects started showing up in the things that he was recording. Some of the stylistic aspects of what we were doing at that point, like the Alanis Morissette record, and some of the other things we started doing. But it was a nice blend for us because it had it had a poppy vibe to it, but it also had more guitars. We did record live drums, at that point, even though we were using drum machines, to lay down the initial recordings. And E.G. was a great singer, and really enjoyed working with E.G.
Yeah, I know since you live in LA too, and she still does. Do you ever see each other, or when's the last time you talked to her?
It's been a long time. We're friends on Facebook, and I see her.
Oh, okay.
All the activities that she does.
So then throughout most of the 90s, it seems like you were going back to kind of more like R&B music.
Yeah. kind of going back to the roots again.
Mm-hmm.
And ended up doing a lot of work in the UK
Oh.
with a group called Eternal, and had top 5 record in the UK. And
Mm-hmm.
Eternal, I ended up like four or five songs on the Eternal album, which sold millions of copies, and working on a lot of projects in the UK, and also in Australia too.
Wow, that's cool.
Australia.
And nowadays, you're.
No, it's funny because there's like a history of jazz artists. Um, when they get to a certain point, they end up working in Europe or moving to Europe to work, and it's like if you're active, if most reaction, you go where people want you. And
Mm-hmm.
the thing about a lot of the other markets, like the US, is very quick to, you you make it quickly and then you disposed of very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And survival in the music business a lot of times depends on just kind of getting through a certain period of time, and you go where people want you and you can survive. And in Europe, a lot of the European countries and in the UK, there's a greater respect for the artistic aspects and the expert, the technical aspects of what you do as a musician or a songwriter.
Yeah.
And you're not as quick to, if you're successful in the UK, I would notice that hey, you had a hit like 10 years ago and you're still getting a lot of work here,
Mm-hmm.
and which wouldn't have been the case in the US. It would be like, who's the next new thing,
Right.
So I ended up getting a lot of work in the UK, and it's funny because a lot of that work ended up igniting things in the US again. So it's kind
Mm-hmm.
of like you want to just keep the flame burning.
I was going to ask you back a little bit, but I was going to ask, do you still have your own demos of, the songs that you did for Dusty or songs that you did around that time?
I do. Some of them, yeah, I do. Some of them.
It'd be really cool to hear those.
Yeah, yeah. Some of the demos are really interesting because they were all done with great musicians, and
Mm-hmm.
like I said, the attention to detail was all there. It wasn't like you were missing anything. There's a seed. The thing is, successful songs, if like when you hear a demo and then you go to record it in the so-called master recording, one of the most important aspects that a producer has to keep in mind is what made that demo work. Why did I like it to start with? What was the thing about it that pulled me into the song? And a good producer will recognize what it is about that demo that makes it listenable, that makes it a hit, so to speak. And
Mm-hmm.
I've heard a lot of masters where they didn't capture what the demo had,
Yeah.
like
Right.
miss the point of it, and that was the opportunity that we found when we were in MCA, was that we, instead of leaving so much to the imagination, we were able to really zero in and capture what it was that the producer had to hang on to,
Mm-hmm.
that made it happen.
Right.
And that's why a lot of those demos ended up becoming the foundation of those masters, and it was the vision of the producer, the kind of the clarification that they knew that they had to maintain this aspect that made it work in the end. So when producers get demos of songs and they listen to it, the most important, and they're like blown away by it. Well, what is it that's blowing you away? Why is it that this is working so well? As opposed to going in and just rebuilding the whole thing from scratch, you know, maybe there's something about this original recording that you should keep, you know.
No, that's kind of random, I guess, but uh, did you ever work with the Keane brothers?
No, I know who they are though. Yeah,
Yeah, because
there's a lot of talented people, right?
well, it's interesting to me because there were several albums in recorded in the LA area with great session musicians that were just only released in Japan.
Yeah, yeah. I did a lot of production for a company called Amuse America.
Mhm.
In Aichi Nato was the kind of the A&R guy. I still am in contact with him. This was like in the early mid '80s.
Okay.
I produced an artist, an actor, Japanese project for him, and I did several other projects for Aichi. And he still has his main artist is Kataro. Do you know who Kataro is?
Yeah, I think yeah.
A new age artist, but
Mhm.
he's still around. Really super nice guy, and that's a market that I've never been to Japan, but I would love to go.
Yeah. Then I guess just probably one of the last things I can ask you is, uh, like early '80s LA, late '70s LA, when you were gigging around and stuff, or when you were playing with your band after the Faragher brothers broke up. Did you ever meet, or was there like any wild stories you have with well-known musicians or?
Yeah, a lot of wild stories. In fact, too wild to repeat. To probably probably not a good idea for me to even say them. They're that wild because
Well,
it was a crazy time. There weren't as many restrictions, governing what you could and couldn't do. It was pre-AIDS. It was when cocaine was still very prevalent
yeah,
in the music business. And I mean, there was a time when it was common for people to say that using cocaine was harmless. It was
right.
like nothing will happen to you. It's not addictive. It's not. Yeah. So people, I watched as people like literally destroyed
Mhm.
themselves doing drugs,
Yeah,
and the debris was outrageous. It was just like everything was all kind of, the music culture was so predominant. People just expected certain types of behavior,
hmm,
and going into record companies, it wasn't that unusual for the door to shut and then the record executive to start doing cocaine on the desk in his office, right there in broad
right.
daylight. So it was fueled with craziness. It was just the whole. I even recognized when um, like engineers were doing too much cocaine in the studio, because the mixes would be like really high end. All the EQ was turned up on the high end because they couldn't hear the high end with being so
Yeah.
high themselves. Things were dictated by uh, you know I mean, at the record plant, for instance, there was a guy whose sole job, they called him the doctor, and they would call him on the intercom, Dr. So and so, come to Studio B, and they would bring in outboard gear, like a digital delay or something, or compressor,
Hmm.
and taped on the top of the outboard gear was an envelope, and inside the envelope was cocaine.
Yeah.
And they'd bring it in, set it down on the studio. Do you need anything else? And that would be billed against that artist's project. So that would show up as a rental at the record plant for so and so artist on their project, and it would be on their budget.
Yeah,
And
that's
they,
wild.
I mean, it was just like blatant. craziness going on, So, I mean, I guess it was something that you had to see to believe it, really. But back then it just seemed like, oh, that's just how it is. That's just the state of the music business. Until all these people started like falling at the wayside, and
Right.
With losing their asses and their health and their families, and I mean, you could just see the effect, and also the industry was just so. I mean, basically, it was all about, like I said before, getting the record deal, getting in that position, and that was the success, as opposed to making great music and having success on the radio or selling records. It was like achieving the record deal, achieving the publishing deal.
Right.
Like these milestones. So when you got in that position, then suddenly you made it, and that was making it. But it wasn't really making it. It was just, you had got to a certain point, but you hadn't made it yet,
Right.
But it was like that was considered success already if you had just got to the point where you had the record deal, and so it was kind of a distorted view of reality, and LA was kind of fueled by that, with a lot of craziness going on.
Because there's a couple Facebook pages I follow that post flyers from like band gigs in LA at that time, and I know I've seen several lineups where it's like Faragher brothers and like from that mid-late 70s period. It's just really cool to see. So I figured there had to have been some stuff you could talk about, but you just don't want to talk about.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what some of these people are doing now, so I wouldn't use it,
Yeah. Did you get, because I know at that same time that the Runaways were blowing up, did you ever like encounter them?
I would encounter Kim Fowley.
Okay.
I used to do a lot of work at Larrabee Studios before they became like even a bigger studio, but they were still kind of in their smaller phase. And Kim Fowley used to hang out at Larrabee, and he would sit in the stairwell. There was like a little stairwell, and he would kind of hold court, and people would sit around and at the base of the stairs and listen to his stories. And he was a character to behold. And he had stories about everything going all the way back to when he claimed to sing Alley Oop in the Hollywood Argyles back in the late 50s. There were a lot of characters like that, which,
right.
The nice thing about what used to be one of the nice things that I missed so much was there was a studio culture. There was a studio environment that
right.
where you could. If it was a busy studio like Conway or Larrabee, or Ocean Way or United Western or someplace, where you were working at, you would run into people.
Right.
There have more than one room, and while you were recording in one room, there would be somebody else recording in another room. As the Faragher brothers, we used to rehearse at a rehearsal studio called Bijou, which was on Cahuenga, near between rehearsing in the next room over. So Faragher brothers were rehearsing for our tour in one room, and right next door was Stevie Wonder with Wonderlove rehearsing. And I remember going. They had a bathroom. They had a lounge, and the bathroom was a little spiral staircase, one of those little teeny metal ones, that go up. And then when you got to the top of the spiral staircase, there was a door, and that was the bathroom, and it was just like a little teeny bathroom. And I remember taking a break and going up the spiral staircase opening the door, flipping on the light, and Stevie Wonder was in the bathroom in the dark. But he just, he was going to the bathroom in there, and I was like, oh my God, and I flipped the light back off and shut the door, and he just started laughing because he didn't turn the light on, he didn't need to turn the light on, but it was just like one thing you would not expect to see,
Yeah, that's a great story.
But but you run into people all the time, working at the record plant, Sunset Sound, when we were recording the Faragher Brother album, Hall & Oates were recording there at the same time. And you go out and you play they'd be shooting baskets out in the driveway, and you go out and you'd shoot baskets with them. And, there were people intermingled, musicians who were working on your record, be working on somebody else's record. And you would run into people, you talk about it, or you might see somebody from the record company that come in, So there was always something going on musical, and, there were opportunities kind of presenting themselves just because of your physical location. That doesn't happen anymore. That isn't, people recording in home studios, people, have private sessions, private production companies that don't mingle with other people, you don't have those same types of physical opportunities of running into people, that you used to have back in those days when studios were so prolific.
Right. Yeah, because just in general, I find that whole period fascinating of, what it was like to be a LA session musician or songwriter from those late 70s through the early to mid 80s. Because when I interviewed Billy Steinberg, it was like I was equally mesmerized as I am now. And I talked to Desmond Child, but I haven't interviewed him yet. He's kind of, have you ever worked with him?
I haven't, I've met him a few times.
Okay.
I've sent. He wrote with Vinny. He was I Was Made for Loving You. He wrote with Vinny Poncia. It was one of his first hits.
Yeah.
He kind of came up through the same period that I came up through. So I've sat and talked to him, like at the ASCAP. He'll do seminars at ASCAP. I've done seminars for ASCAP, and he's part of that. So I've met him a few times, and he's been extremely successful in what he does.
I would just talk.
A lot of people from that period, are still around. A lot of it's like people that just don't give up. They just hang in there, keep going. That's the thing, if you invested this much time and energy into your art, and it's not like you're ever going to stop.
Right.
If you're still doing it for the same reasons you started to do it, the joy of it, and not just because you wanted to necessarily make a lot of money or be successful. That's part of it, but if your initial reason was music and you're still into music, then you're still doing it. It's by nature. I like right now I'm building a studio out in the desert, in Desert Hot Springs, and I'm putting as much effort into doing that as I would have done back in the 80s.
Right.
Same kind.
Well, thanks. This has been amazing for me. It was really informative.
I'm glad we could do this. I'm really excited to meet you and to have an opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you.
You seem very well versed in the backgrounds of a lot of different musicians and artists.
Yeah, if I like a songwriter or a musician, I tend to just completely look back and focus on everything they've done. And finding out that you worked with E.G. Daily and you played on, you know, like Danny Spanos and Drama. I mean, I do those albums. I've had those albums since I was like in high school. I'm 23 now. So that was just,
Right.
that was just really, really cool to me.
And how did you start doing what you're doing? What kind of brought you into it?
You mean doing interviews?
Yeah, like just and you know, doing the research and
Oh, I don't know. I mean, because I found out that because I was always into Michael Bolton, and I think the first thing that really got me interested was going back and seeing that he was like a lead singer of a rock band on Polydor in the 70s, and I was like, oh, like if he did this, then there has to be a lot of stuff I don't even know about other artists I really like or songwriters I really like, and I didn't start doing interviews until I asked Billy Steinberg because I know he wrote a bunch of like dark power pop songs, and he was the front man of a power pop band before he met Tom, and then he had never been asked about any of that stuff publicly. So that was primarily what I talked to him about, and I know I couldn't really find any interviews with you, and I figured you had to have like an amazing history. So that's kind of how I got the idea to start doing these.
oh, that's great, man. It's nice to meet you. And where are you located? Where do you live?
I'm in Minnesota.
Oh, you're in Minnesota. Okay. Well, don't forget to vote.
Yeah.
We need your vote.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'll get this uploaded to YouTube and I'll send you the message once I have it posted.
Okay, sounds great. All right, Chris.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Take care of yourself.
Bye.